Well, imagine that your faith is it's kind of like a car. Everybody's faith is a little different, so we all have different model cars. Some people drive a Corvette, some a Mustang, some a sedan, maybe a minivan, or a SUV, or a truck with a plow on it. But all of our faiths are held within that vehicle, and it encompasses and carries our faith with us. And our destination in life, our destination is love. And love is the kingdom of God. And so we're headed to that city, that beautiful heavenly city of Jerusalem, and we're driving there in our faith, in our car. And what powers the car? What powers the car is hope. Hope is our engine. And so we have faith, which is our car, our destination is love, and our engine that propels us is hope. And it's hope that helps drive us through the mountains and the valleys of our lives, through the rainstorms, through the snowstorms, through the heavy snows, and through the whiteouts and the difficulties of our lives. It's hope that carries us through it. And today's readings are really all about hope. We have Abraham. He's traveled all this distance to be in Palestine, in the Holy Land, where God has promised him this land. And his biggest fear is that he has no descendants. And so he's quite despondent, he's quite disturbed and upset that God has not provided him and Sarah with a child. And so what happens? God comes to him and says, step outside of the tent and look up into the sky and see the stars. That's how many descendants you'll have. You'll not be able to count them. But if you listen to the story carefully, it's interesting because toward the end of the story, Abraham has a sacrifice and he seals his covenant. He and God kind of sign a covenantal contract. And then he goes into a trance and it says, nightfall has fallen. So night comes. So it seems in the story that when Abraham is taken outside the tent by God and he looks up into the sky, it's actually daytime. Now, if you look up into the sky, how many stars are you going to see? You're going to only see one, the sun, because the sun blocks out all of the other stars. And so it really is God's way of saying, trust in me, have hope. You know the stars are there, you just can't see them yet. And so God is saying to Abraham, your descendants will be many. You will have many sons and daughters. And of course, Abraham trusts in God. He takes that hope that God has given him and believes in him. And the church teaches that we are all the sons and daughters of Abraham, the sons and daughters in faith with Abraham. And so God has fulfilled that promise through Jesus in us. And then, of course, we have St. Paul. He talks about our home, our heavenly home. Our home is in heaven. And that while we don't know exactly what it's going to be like, we know that our bodies, the frail bodies that we have, will be replaced with glorified bodies like Christ. Which brings us, of course, to the hope of the Transfiguration. And Mount Tabor is this nice mountain. It's all by itself. There's these mountain ranges, and then there's this one mountain all by itself. And it's kind of like this tall mountain all alone. And I walked up Mount Tabor. It took about 45 minutes. So it's a long trek, and they had a nice little road. So you can imagine that Peter, John, James, and Jesus took a long time to get up that mountain because they didn't have a trail that they could walk up that wound around the mountain. They had to walk straight up and around. And it was a long, arduous journey. And they get to the top, and they're very tired. And of course, you notice what happens. The 3 disciples, they go to sleep. They also go to sleep at Gethsemane. So there's this familiar thing of the disciples are always tired. Their faith is draining, and it drains them. And then they come to this mountain, and Jesus is up there, and he's transfigured, and he's standing with Moses and Elijah, which represent the law and the prophets, that God is going to fulfill in Jesus all that he promised the people of Israel, that he is going to fulfill the law and the prophets, and that the Messiah is there. And Peter says something very interesting. It says he was confused in what he was saying, but I don't really think he was confused. He was thinking, it can't get any better than this. Here we are with God in the flesh, shining before us in his glorified body, transfigured into the glory of God. So let's put up a tent for Moses, Elijah, and Jesus, and we'll just stay here, and it'll be perfect. But the fact is that the Transfiguration isn't about that. It's about revealing to Jesus and to the disciples that Jesus is God and that he is God's beloved Son, but that he's meant to come down off that mountain, that his exodus is the way of the cross. Paul looks at the cross and sees it as the glory of God, and Jesus realizes that he can't stay on that mountain. It's a beautiful thing, it's heavenly, it's glorified body, and it's transfigured into his glorified body, but he knows that he has to come down the mountain. Peter and James and John, they don't realize that that's what has to happen yet. They think, let's stay here. This is the moment we've been waiting for. And Jesus says, no, it's not the moment. He has to come back down that mountain. And that's the message for us, that we are called to be a people of hope, knowing that as we struggle through life, our faith can be strong and firm, and that God is with us. That was the hope that God gave Jesus in the Transfiguration, that he could endure the travel to Jerusalem and the cross because he knew that it would come to Easter Sunday, that he would rise from the dead and reconcile all of us to God. But he couldn't do that. He can't get to that transfiguration without the struggle and the suffering. There's no resurrection if there isn't a cross. That Jesus had to die on the cross was what it meant to be up there on that mountain, to give him the courage to know that God was with him. And God gives each and every one of us that hope and that courage to know that in our struggles, in this life, God is with us. So have that hope. Know that God is always with you in your trials and in your struggles. And know that just as Jesus was on Mount Tabor, you can have those experiences on the mountaintop. You can have those experiences of God, and when you have them, you can't just stay in them. We have to go forth from this building and live that hope. We have to continue to journey toward our heavenly home in Jerusalem. And that takes courage, it takes faith, it takes hope. But in the end, we will reach our destination, which is to be one with God and that love of God. So as wonderful as it was to be on the top of that mountain, Jesus also understood that he had to walk down the mountain. He had to travel to Jerusalem. He had to suffer and die, knowing that one day he would be raised and be glorified forever. And we know that as we struggle in our days and have our difficulties, we need to trust that God is always there, always with us, and we too will one day be one with God.